You may think the PowerPoint is for you. The PowerPoint is to remind me what on earth I was going to say. One of the joys of speaking at this meeting is that there's actually people in here who have real experience of building cities from the bottom up. So it doesn't just become a discussion, a debate amongst researchers, amongst academics, but it also engages and involves those who are the active agents in making cities. And this is Manila in the Philippines. And what is unusual about this is, as Heidi said, 1 in 7 in the world's population live in informal settlements like this. Can you press? Many cities I work in, between 40 and 70% of their entire population are in settlements like this. But as you see these settlements, what do you actually see? From one position, you're seeing the contravention of official rules and regulations that are meant to promote health and safety. Therefore, these should be bulldozed. Or if you're a climate change specialist, you look at that and say, ooh, that's very vulnerable to sea level rise and to the hurricanes that absolutely devastate many of the Philippines, much of the Philippines every year, in desperate need of disaster risk reduction. Or you see it as real estate. You know, if we think of Corral, the informal settlement you saw in the first slide, this is a fantastic location. The land is very valuable. Get rid of those people, realize the potential. Or you look at it and say, well, that's actually where the labor force that underpins the whole city lives. I was talking to a very senior Indian civil servant, and he was complaining to me about all these people that come to informal settlements. They're all from the rural areas. They're all unemployed. They should go home. So I asked him, do you have a maid? Yes. Do you have a cook? Yes. Do you have a driver? Yes. Do you have a security guard? Yes, 2 of them. Do you have someone that collects your laundry every day? Yes. Ask them where they live. 2 days later, I met him again. He said, I see your point. What he had assumed was it was only recent rural migrants that were in the informal settlements. What he didn't realize is all the services that he depended on every day were in informal settlements. Sorry, go back one. Or maybe this is the housing, the only housing that low-income groups can afford. Now, all those are different perspectives. In a way, each of those has some validity. You go to the next one. When I meet mayors or senior civil servants, they talk to me about their city, and they talk it in terms of the kilometers of roads that have been built, the house starts, the new water connections, the schools, the growth in factory output, the financial transactions. Now, all of these, the next one, please. Sorry, go on back. All of these have an exclusive focus on the role of government and the role of the formal private sector. They aren't including civil society at all. And if these cities think, if you talk to mayors, you talk to senior civil servants, this is the vision of the city that they're aspiring to. There's an amazing presentation by Vanessa Watson from the African Center for Cities that has collected the recent master plans and future plans of many cities in Africa. This is Kigali. This is how the senior civil servants in Kigali see their city. Can I have the next one, please? This is how the senior civil servants and the mayor of Dar es Salaam see the future of Dar es Salaam. Next one, please. This is Kigali today. These are the informal settlements developed by people outside of all those official statistics. There's another version of how cities are built. It's in the daily efforts and investments of individuals and households that actually produces most of the housing stock. And it's where most low-income groups live. And if you look at the dollars they invest in their informal settlements every year, it actually often is more per person per year than the government invests in the housing stock per person per year. The next slide, please. When you look at official statistics, what they report on housing starts or housing completions is usually between 1 and 4 housing units per 1,000 population. But this means that the housing stock is growing at 0.4% a year. And yet many cities are growing at 4%, 5%, 6%, 7% a year. Does it actually mean that 9 out of 10 people are homeless? No, it's that the official statistics only record the official buildings built. They don't record the buildings built, developed, expanded, improved in all the informal settlements, which is why you get these nonsense statistics. And you remember that beautiful vision of Dar es Salaam you saw earlier? Well, this is Dar es Salaam. This is Dar es Salaam today. These are the sort of settlements where 70 or even 80% of Dar es Salaam's population lives. Completely at odds with the views and the dreams and the imagination of senior civil servant officials. So the issue is, how are informal settlements and the informal economy actually perceived? These are the real city. These are the real city housing production processes. These are the real livelihood sources for so many people. And it's even in successful cities you get this. Mumbai is one of the most successful cities in Asia. It's the financial capital of India. It is leading, shining India. I could show you pictures of Mumbai, 30, 40, 50 views, all of new high-rises. Looks gorgeous. Yet half the population in Mumbai live in informal or illegal settlements with their contribution to the economy ignored and their right to be in the city ignored. If we look at the informal enterprises that are so central to the city economy, you see the constant harassment, the restrictions, the banning of what they do. I was recently in Zimbabwe, in Krobra, an informal settlement being developed by the Zimbabwe Homeless People's Federation. They had a very modest, small market there, which is where they all went for their daily wares. Every 3 days, every 4 days, the police come and try and shut it down, confiscate their wares, or fine them. Yet they're fulfilling one of the most fundamental tasks. It was interfering with no one's space. There's something wrong with a law that deems illegal the way that most city dwellers make a living, and most of the way city dwellers get a home. If informal processes are building most housing, can we find ways of supporting those informal processes so the housing gets built easier, quicker, better? South Africa, the post-apartheid government has made a very strong commitment to housing everyone. Yet at the same time that they support contractor-built housing, they're ignoring or bulldozing the very informal processes that are producing and can produce most of the housing. Next slide, please. There's a housing subsidy program in South Africa. It's been there for a long time. It's actually one of the most generous subsidy programs for housing for low-income groups, in theory. Quite a decent subsidy is available to any first-time household seeking a house. But there's two ways in which housing is built. In the first way, the contractor gets the money, and for every subsidy that is allocated to contractors, there's generally 2 subsidies for one house. One house doesn't get built, it goes wrong, they build 10 square meters per subsidy. As one of the Federation members in South Africa stated, Mandela promised me a house, and he built me a closet for my clothes, because the the contractors build are so small. But there's another way. There's a way of supporting the informal processes by which most housing gets built. The Federation for the Urban Poor in South Africa, for every subsidy they get, 3 housing units are built, because 2 are built that didn't get the subsidy. For each subsidy, one back. For each subsidy, 150 square meters of housing is produced. Now, which of these 2 processes would you use if you had limited funding? The strange thing is that most of the funding goes to the contractor-built model, not to the people's process model. Okay, next one, thank you. Since Ruby is here from the Philippines Federation, I'm not going to dwell on the first example, but the Homeless People's Federation in the Philippines can build houses and install infrastructure far cheaper than contractors. Therefore, would represent a very powerful and very useful partner for local governments. In Karachi, and actually in many other cities in Pakistan, Um, a people-driven process for installing sewers and in some cases installing water supply has worked very well. They always say that sewers are too expensive for low-income groups. Yet in Karachi, a local NGO assisted the residents of each lane to develop a financial plan to build their own sewers and install them and maintain them, and they brought down the unit costs to a fifth of what they were normally charged by the municipal authorities. Suddenly this community-driven informal process, building very good quality sewers and connections to each house, became affordable to all low-income groups. We also look at a second set of city investors. Go into any informal settlement, and there's lots of things happening. There's residents' association, there's savings groups, there's clubs, there's very often a parent association for local schools, there's a support group for the local health centre, all done outside of government, all done informally, all very much part of the city and the services it provides, none of it recorded, none of it seen as legitimate. I remember going into Kibera, this enormous informal settlement in Kenya, and most of the kids go to private schools. Doesn't mean they're rich. These are private schools which are in informal settlements. You pay 100 shillings a month to put your children through there because they can't get their kids into government schools. So again, an informal process producing services that is outside the official laws, official rules, official regulations. The next, please. And the next one, please. If we were to assign a value to all these services, they would represent a very important part of the city economy, but they never get recorded. The next one, please. So maybe we move to self-financing. If government isn't going to support these informal processes, then let's look for alternative ways of supporting them. We got some fantastic examples where community organisations, sometimes with local NGOs, put in good quality water, good quality sanitation, good quality drainage, good quality healthcare, good quality schools, independent of government. Very often for water provision, there was a recognition that what people choose to pay is a lot more than what engineers assume they will pay because of the incredible time and energy saved when water is piped into your home. Self-financing is important because, first of all, it's based on what people can afford. Secondly, if you can reduce the cost of self-provision and get full cost recovery, there's no limit on the scale of what you can achieve. The third thing that's fantastic about self-provision, and with apologies to those from the international aid agencies here, is that it avoids international aid. It avoids having to negotiate with external agencies and meet what are often quite complex and difficult criteria. So that can we develop water supply systems independent of the state, independent of aid agencies, paid for by what low-income groups can afford? Well, we've got some good examples. We've also got self-financing systems for sanitation. In many cities in India, there are public toilets and washing facilities designed, built, and managed by low-income groups and their community organisations. Again, it's outside the conventional way this is done, although this draws usually on municipal finance. We have the example from Karachi, back one more. We have the example from many places in Karachi that you can self-finance sanitation. We have examples from Luanda and many other cities where you can self-finance sanitation. So perhaps we're looking for autonomous models of development outside of government, outside of international agencies. The next, please. But there's huge difficulties with that. What I think we're looking for, and this is the model that has been developed by the many federations of slum dwellers, federations of shack dwellers, is a model where you bring all the investments and all the resources together, and you draw on individuals and households and communities and local government and utilities, but in ways that respond to the needs and the priorities of low-income groups and are accountable to them. And again, we've got many examples of this. Next one, please. And community-based models simply can't do a lot of things. There's a lot of romanticism around community-based capacities. Community-based organizations can't build water treatment plants. They can't build sewer mains, water mains. They can't provide the collection points for solid waste collection. What you see that is remarkable is where government and civil society agree to where they can work best together. That's when you get the most remarkable innovations. So Arif Hassan, when he talks about the experience in Karachi, he talks about small pipes and big pipes. Small pipes communities can do. Big pipes, the water mains, the sewer mains, the drainage mains, they can't do. If government concentrates on doing the big pipes and communities do the small pipes, that's where you get dramatic cost reductions and enormous improvement in provision, where local government and civil society work together. The next one, please, and the next one, please. If we look at the experience with formal savings groups, in general, you exclude low-income groups. They can't afford to save regularly. They're too poor to meet loan requirements, so they're going to go into default. And anyway, if you're running a savings groups, you don't want people saving tiny amounts because the transaction costs are too high. No bank wants someone coming in every day and putting in 1 krona into their savings account. But if we look at the experience of the slum dwellers and the shack dwellers federations with their savings groups, low-income groups can save regularly. Very good levels of loan recovery. But interestingly enough, the savings groups, mostly women savers, mostly women managers, which are the foundation of these federations of slum dwellers, federations of shack dwellers, as they save, they learn to manage money together. As they learn to manage money together, they learn to plan together. What it's doing is not only producing a savings that each of them can draw on, but it's producing a savings structure that can manage finance and then manage projects. As many of the federations said, they're not so much collecting money, they're collecting people. At the center of all these local processes where local government is working with civil society, or at least the ones I know, you've got the active engagement of the federations. Federations of slum dwellers, federations of shack dwellers, homeless people's federations. In India, the National Slum Dwellers Federation and Mahila Milan have over 1.5 million members. Over 1.5 million members. Now that represents a pretty substantial interest group, supported by a local NGO. Thailand, you've got a huge range of community organizations and networks, in this instance supported by a national agency, which is unusual, Community Organizations Development Institute. South Africa, you have the South African Federation of the Poor, Urban Poor, supported by a small NGO, the Community Organizations Resource Center. Same in Zimbabwe, same in Kenya, same in Malawi, and we have Sarah here from the Malawi Federation. This combination of savings groups that federate with small NGOs that support them in their work is proving a very powerful model of building cities from the bottom up. Why are they significant? Well, it means that we, as outside groups, can work with those that really do represent the urban poor organizations. This isn't some self-appointed community leader. These are representatives from savings groups that have accountability downwards to their members. If we look at the experience of these savings groups and the federations they form, they show this remarkable ability to take on projects, to build toilets, to build houses, to support upgrading, to do very careful community enumerations, to negotiate agreements with local governments, to persuade local governments to support them, often with the allocation of land, to make external funding go 5 times, 10 times, 15 times further. And of course, in all these organizations, women have central roles, which again is very unusual in development. As these savings groups federate, they also gives them a much greater capacity to negotiate with local government. If you've got representatives from 10, 15, 20, 50 informal settlements negotiating with local government, they have more capacity, more power than if they're doing it individually. And as they negotiate with local government, as they develop partnerships with local governments, so they've shown this capacity to change building codes, change planning standards, so these actually are much more pro-poor. Go to the next one, please. I was in Baikala, which is a resource centre for the women pavement dwellers in Mumbai 6 months ago. And a lot of people come to learn from these women pavement dwellers on how they manage their savings. And they talked with some amusement about this general who had come to see them. And the general, they laughed because the general was very tall. The women pavement dwellers, their homes are about this high, and about this wide, and about this deep. And this visitor couldn't fit in them. They were also very amused by the fact that when this visitor arrived, he said that he only had 10 minutes for them. And there were lots of people talking on mobile phones around him, and the women pavement dwellers described their amusement because they sat him down and they showed him their savings book and they explained how they saved. And he stayed 2 hours. It was Colin Powell, the former foreign minister for the United States government. And the beauty of it is they didn't know who he was and they didn't care. What they appreciated was that he gave them 2 hours of their time. And of course, the reason everyone was on the phone was they were changing the meeting with the Prime Minister and the President and the Minister of Finance, because Colin Powell was sitting listening to women pavement dwellers save. They do these amazing enumerations. One of the difficulties, if you're negotiating with government to put in sewers and drains and water and healthcare into an informal settlement, the government doesn't have a map, doesn't have details who live there, doesn't even know the street names. And what all these federations do is that they do very detailed surveys and mapping and enumerations of all the informal settlements. So they can go to local government and say, look, here is a map, here is a plan, here's who lives here, let's work together in upgrading the settlement. They build model houses. You can see a model house being built at the bottom. If you've got land and you're trying to build as cheaply as possible and you're limited as to how big the houses are, you've got to have a very good design. What better way to do a design than all the savings group members building these full-size mock-ups using linen as to show where the walls are, to experiment with different designs that they can enter, that they can measure. They usually use their own, in India, their own saris as the measuring unit. They do pilot projects. They build a community toilet. They build 200 houses, often without government support. But then suddenly they have something to show government. So I don't go to local government to say, give us land on which to build. I go to local government and say, come and look at the houses we built. Come and look at the community toilets we've developed. And that then provides a much stronger basis for them to negotiate support, to expand how they build a city, how they manage the city. They visit each other all the time. You know, you go to any federation and there's a constant stream of visitors from other savings groups coming to visit the new house they built, the new community toilet they developed, the new land subdivision they've developed, the new building blocks that they're using that are half the cost of the conventional building blocks. And it's through those local exchanges that they learn. And very often they'll take local government officials with them. So if you're having difficulty with your local government official about reducing plot sizes, you take him to Windhoek, where the city agreed to halve the size of the minimum plot size and agreed to allow community infrastructure, which enormously reduced the cost of each plot. And they do international exchanges so that they can learn from each other, the Indians to South Africa, the South Africans to Zimbabwe, the Zimbabweans to Kenya, the Kenyans to the Ugandans to the Ghanaians. All of them visiting each other, celebrating what they've achieved, swapping knowledge, exchanging tactics, learning about strategy, how you drive change within city governments. And of course, these are mass movements. Unusually, they're seeking to work with local government and to show local government what they're capable of. But they will also retreat to a more oppositional stance if local government goes against them. They have some powerful allies. I don't know, this isn't probably the right audience to show the heir to the throne in England, but that is actually the heir to the throne in England. And I laugh with my students, who's the most important person in this picture? Most important person in the picture. It's Joaquin Aporta, the head of the National Slum Dwellers Federation, one of the founders of Shack Dwellers International, a community leader who has been put in prison 43 times. who spent his life from 1970 to now negotiating, pushing, shouting, shoving, and actually more responsible than anyone else for showing new models, working with savings groups. Because they're dominated by women savings groups who feel they haven't got the power to oppose government, so they seek to work with government. But if government goes against them, they come out and they oppose in a very traditional way. This was a campaign when it looked like Dharavi, this enormous informal settlement in Mumbai, was going to be allocated to international development and basically bulldozed for those who lived there. And this was a demonstration to say, you know, if you really want to bulldoze Dharavi, there's 400,000 of us that are going to block all the roads and all the railways in Mumbai. But using this is the last resort. The next one, please. They've learned to do these informal censuses of informal settlements where they collect data from every household. In effect, what they're doing is what census authorities should do, but covering all the informal settlements for which there's no data. The beauty of doing this is that it's useful to government, but it's also useful to them. It gives them data about themselves that they can reflect on, look at, and use for planning their own developments. It helps give them legitimacy. In Old Fadama, this enormous informal settlement in Accra, the enumeration showed that the city market and the city transport terminals were absolutely dependent on the people that lived in Old Fadama. So for the local authorities, Old Fadama was not seen as a place with a lot of migrants causing problems. It was seen as a central part of housing the city economy. Giving these detailed digital maps, the bottom map is one of many maps done in Epworth outside of Zimbabwe. As the federations produce these detailed maps, these digital maps, so again it gains the attention of local government. The federations are going to local governments with digital maps, with GIS systems, very often more sophisticated than the local government has itself. But in the end, it's their data, it's not official data, which kind of changes the position, the relationship between the two. The next one, please. And it's funny, you know, as a researcher, when you design big household surveys, you try to limit the amount of time. You can't afford to have someone spending too much time in each interview. And you keep your sample frame small because you can't cope with too many households. The federations turn that logic on its head. They go very slowly, so everyone listens and becomes part of these enumerations and these censuses. This is an enumeration in Pune, in a very dense informal settlement they're upgrading. And they talk to every household. Once the federations asked my advice about who to interview in an informal settlement, and I said, interview one person in 3, and then you'll get enough detail to be able to produce disaggregated statistics. And they laughed at me and said, that's nonsense. We want to talk to everyone. We want to involve everyone in the enumeration. It just shows a different logic, which sometimes manifests itself as things that are completely different from, they're probably best not to get advice from people like me. And this constant exchange as they visit each other and talk to each other, it shows what their brothers and sisters are achieving in other places. It makes them feel committed to other savings groups, not just theirs. It builds a movement that isn't in competition with each other, where the success of one savings group in building, in community toilets, in getting land, is celebrated by everyone, not seen in competition with each other. And as the savings group leaders reflect on what they've achieved, so that also produces learning, a synthesis. It supports learning from government officials too. The World Urban Forum, you know, this jamboree that UN Habitat organizes every 2 years, usually completely ignoring grassroots organizations and federations. Federation members go to this and then find themselves able to talk to their mayor or their city engineer who's been invited to the official bit. And it's amazing how many instances of going to the World Urban Forum the federations have used to develop good relations with mayors. The mayor of Harare talks about how he met for the first time grassroots organizations from Harare when he was in Nanjing at one of the World Urban Forums. Next one, please. I think I've already covered this. The way that community exchanges build solidarity between different groups, spread a real sense of equality. And the range of exchanges. Diana, are you here? This is Namibia with a Sri Lankan talking to a Namibian, isn't it? I think it's one of your photos. I pinched it. Is it in Namibia? I'm pretty certain that was an exchange in Namibia where the Sri Lankan community leader is talking to the Namibian community leader. And they don't speak the same language, but somehow in these international exchanges, they manage to exchange their experiences. And a comment by Sheila Patel, who's one of the professionals who's been supporting this growth in these federations around the world. Without organized demands, political processes rarely deliver. The most powerful resource for any poor urban community is being organized, bringing its own ideas, resources, and strategies to the table. Next one, please. You use precedents to change attitudes. You manage to reduce plot sizes, for instance, in Harare, and then you show the city engineers and the city planners in other cities in Zimbabwe what has been achieved. Once it's been done once and accepted once, so it becomes more easy to negotiate it elsewhere. And you're setting precedents. You're setting precedents that are moving towards a formal rule, but a rule and a regulation that low-income groups can actually support. It no longer becomes, in Harare, 300 square meter plot, which is the minimum plot size. It becomes 150 square meters, or in some places 100 square meters, or I believe in the Philippines, even smaller. Next one, please. So what we're seeing from the federations is they're developing new legal solutions, but on the urban poor's own terms. Sometimes this is called the rights plus agenda. It recognizes, thank you, it recognizes their rights, but it also recognizes their right to establish the right, their ability to actually set what should be achieved. I haven't got time to go through it, but these federations have influenced government policies at national and at state level in many nations, in India, Thailand, South Africa, Namibia, Malawi, Zimbabwe. Also international agencies. We have here Eric Berg, who actually negotiated support, official Norwegian government support for these federations. You're beginning to get those critical links, the understanding that you have to look for alternative financing mechanisms if you want to support a city being built from the bottom up. I won't go through these sorry, can you just go back one? But what is surprising is that you get a lot of hostility for the federations. From politicians, they're not in my party. From NGOs, it's not conforming to the radical way of renegotiating. From the left wing, they're agents of the state, they're stooges of the World Bank. From professionals, they're not following professional standards. Yet if you go and visit what they've achieved, you see the incredible improvement at much lower costs than all the professional solutions. So my last slide. I think there's a huge potential in this bottom-up approach. We've seen it demonstrated in many nations. What we now need to do is to think of the institutions and the financial structures that will multiply support for it 10-fold, 20-fold, 30-fold, without removing community control, community management. We see the politics of patience, how long it takes sometimes to achieve something, yet the federations persist. They keep going. They have an amazing tenacity, even if there's many roadblocks. Sometimes there's many times when what they can't do is just not possible. Very political with a small p, but not political with a big P. They refuse to align with any political party because that would remove their independence and would make them lose support if that political party lost power. Arjun Appadurai, one of the sharpest observers of development, made this comment, which I think is absolutely right. Once mobilized and empowered, the poor themselves prove more capable of reducing poverty than the market, the state, or international donors. But we could add in brackets, but it would be improved a lot if the market, the state, and the international donors learned how to support them. Thank you.